This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. We'll want to start out this week with a big thank you to you, our listeners, for making the PR Podcast part of your weekly routine. We continue to see our listenership climb. We're getting more and more feedback on guests, the ones you love, the ones maybe you're not so fond of, but pretty much you love all the conversations that we're having. So that makes me feel really good. And we also love hearing from you about what you want to hear in future episodes. You know, I'll say it again that we have a new episode of the PR Podcast every week, comes out every Monday, hopefully like clockwork. That is 52 new shows and 52 new guests every year, and we want you to be one of them. Don't worry if you've never been on a podcast. We don't bite much here. But seriously, get in touch on our social pages, send along a direct message, send an email somehow. Tell us what you want to talk about. Tell us when you can come on. We will definitely see about making you a guest, but there is plenty of room in our community to be having these conversations about what we do all day, how we do it better, to share, like we said, our best practices, to make this thing that we call making the news and doing public relations a little bit better and a little bit easier for us. Speaking of people who took the step of getting in touch with us, let's get right into the intro for this week's guest. Tonya McKenzie is the founder of Sand and Shores based in Redondo Beach, California. She is a public relations and leadership consultant specializing in civic, law enforcement, and nonprofit organizations. She's also a trauma survivor and a storyteller with a desire to have a powerful effect on real lives. As a Los Angeles County Commissioner, she is always looking to improve the quality of life for others and leave this world better than she got it through the shared experiences of the stories of those she works with. Tonya, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you, Jody.
I am very excited to have you on. You and I met through mutual acquaintances over social media. And I very quickly realized that you have a terrific perspective. You are quite a force to be reckoned with. Certainly on one of the newest social media platform, Clubhouse, where you just seem to have a stable of people who are following you. But I wanted to talk about everything that you have going on. First, let's just talk a little bit about your background. How'd you get into public relations, and how did you find your way into these specialties, civic, government, law enforcement?
Wow. Sometimes I listen to my introduction. I'm like, who are they talking about? Who's this person? But I always had a desire to be an attorney. So funny, on Spaces last week, I just got to saying, I think publicists, PR professionals, and comms people are as eloquent and tricky with language as attorneys. We just don't get paid as well. So instead of going to law school, I got into marketing and PR. My first big job was with the YMCA out in the Bay Area. The YMCA in the city called Oakley. And most people, because went to school in LA, moved back to the Bay Area, they were like, Oakland? And I was like, no, Oakley. There's a town called Oakley. And it was a town becoming a city. Not too many people get to experience that, right? Well, they had a YMCA that was probably as big as your smallest bathroom. And they were trying to grow their organization, basically build a new facility that would service the city and the new residents and the youth. So I got hired for the job as the director, and then they told me they didn't have the money. So you actually have to build your own position. Like, who does that? And in nonprofit, the truth of the matter is usually a lot of the money gets taken out of marketing, right? But you have this big project. So how do you get people to know about this project that you're working on if you ain't got no money in your marketing dollars?
Never made sense to me either.
Right. So here we go with the PR. I decided to just start reaching out to editors, publishers, writers in the area, in the Bay Area, about what we were trying to do and some of the programs that we started. So I was literally doing market research after I got off my other job. I worked for a company called O&E Communications, who handles all the agency work for Bonds and Safeway. So I would go to Oakland in the morning, drive back to Oakley, and start doing market research finding out what they wanted, putting the programs together, hiring and training the staff, and then doing PR for these programs. And eventually, after the city decided that they really wanted this, we opened up this brand new facility. I spent over $1 million opening this new facility, buying new equipment, and the PR paid off. Like, our grand opening was amazing, the groundbreaking, that whole thing where you are reaching out to find something that resonates with those people in the community that is newsworthy. And for them, especially from becoming a town to a city, that was newsworthy. Like, oh, now we're doing this, we're making this new transition. How can I be a part of this? So telling that story. And Jody, when I pitched and it didn't hit, I would find out what they wanted to hear about, and I would go make a story. Like, we're gonna get this covered because I want to buy this new equipment so we can open up this center. So it was really an organic lead into PR. And what happened is I realized it was working and I loved it. Like, that buzz you get when things are working, you keep doing it. And that has just been something that's driven me in my career the whole time.
That is such a great story about sort of how you found your way into that. Like, you weren't looking to be a PR person, right? But you found what you realized was PR in the process of wanting to achieve the goal that you set out to achieve. You discovered that, hey, it was PR that was going to get you there. That's a great backstory. It reminds me of my friend Steve Awili, who did the same thing when he started he's a food and hospitality PR person, and he does food and hospitality PR in the East End of Long Island. But he was originally a bartender and started a newsletter for restaurants to get the word around about their weekly specials and things like that. He was doing PR before he knew what PR was. It's the same kind of thing. I think that is great. You have now worked with lots of elected leaders, politicians, law enforcement. What do you think they all need communications, right? They all need to talk with the communities that they work in, they represent, that depend on them. Are there things you think they do well and things maybe they do poorly? And how can a person like you help them achieve what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think what they do well is get elected, right? They tell people what they want, what they feel like they want to hear, and then they get into these offices. And I think what they forget is that they need to continuously communicate what they are doing. Now that you've earned my vote, now you need to report back to your supervisor, which is me. We hired you, so now you need to give us the updates. Isn't that what you do at your job? And I think they forget that, now I'm in this office and I can just do what I want. So many times they wind up finding themselves in trouble and needing crisis PR instead of someone like me who wants to just continuously tell their story. They don't recognize that they are a brand. You are a brand, and you are responsible to the people that support you. And when you look at it that way and getting them to understand that, then they're able to think more in a pattern of continuous communication about how you're improving the quality of life of the people that hired you. But not everyone thinks along those lines, So it takes people like us that think in those linear lines to tell them, like, okay, now you have to do this. Why do you have to do this? Who should you be communicating to? Your target audience is the community that you serve. You should be explaining to them what you're doing about this problem that they're having, or how you are enriching their lives with this vote that you made. So being able to break it down in ways that are a little less complex than the entirety of public relations helps them to recognize, I might need some help talking about some of these decisions that I'm making, or some of these moves that I'm making once I get into office. It's just not everyone knows how to tell their story. We have to teach that. And I think being able to coach and teach them through how their communication is also perceived, because sometimes they think, well, I said that. Okay, that's what you said, but does a layman's understand that? Does your neighbor, the person that voted for you, understand that? You know, just giving them perspective sometimes as to, you need to get out of your own head and think how the people that you're supposed to be supporting hears you. It's just a different way of thinking, but that's how I kind of explain, this is what you might need. And then you have organizations like law enforcement. They have, you know, a information desk, and explain to them that, okay, you have these people that are giving information, but they're not really telling the story. And I think especially now, we've all been through the George Floyd situation and this past summer's catastrophe. Many of them are starting to recognize, you're right, we do need someone to help us tell the story of our department, tell the story and bring humanity to the badge, tell the story and communicate that out to the public in which we serve. I just think a lot of elected officials forget that they are in a space of service, and instead of, I'm in this, I'm on this throne that I've been elected to reserve. No. You're in a service position. So even with, you know, breaking it down like a service organization or a membership organization, you're still supposed to be servicing people, servicing your community. What is their ROI for getting you in office? What are they getting in return? Like, having that conversation is a little different.
It's so many great pieces of knowledge that you touched on there, where you started and kind of where you ended up with, you know, making sure that you're constantly telling your story, and to make it maybe a punchline, make sure you have a PR person telling your good stories. Otherwise, you're going to need a crisis person fixing your bad stories, right? You've got to care and feed for that reputation. Once you're in that office, or once you hold that position, whatever it is, elected or otherwise, to make sure, and you've got to tell it over and over again too, right? To make sure that people know what you're doing. You know, you don't just have to file the report once, so to speak. You've got to tell it over and over and over again and be out there. I mean, it really, for a person in a service position in a community, I would think that they absolutely have to have a full-time PR communications staff, and they have to have, and they have to commit a certain number of regular hours to care and feeding for that public reputation, right?
Yeah, and I think right now we have some of the lowest ratings of trust with the communities and their elected officials, because these people forget that they are responsible to the people that voted them in with those stories and with that communication. What is going on, internal and external communication? Sometimes, you know, the right hand don't know what the left hand is doing inside the office. So your community calls and they don't know what's going on. People answer the phone, they can't give you any answers. So how would that build trust with me as a constituent when I can't even get answers from individuals that represent you? It's a serious process that I don't think they take seriously until they have to.
Yeah, you mentioned internal, external communications. I'm of the mind that maybe for the last 5 or 10 years or so, there's no such thing anymore as separate external and internal communications. That internal communications very, very quickly can become external communications by email, right? Somebody can just forward a memo or something like that. But also that there's really no point in, unless you're in the weeds with an employee on the form you want them to fill out, that there's really no point in separating internal and external communications, because everyone's a member of the community. Everyone's going to be out there talking at some point, right? And so you want your internal audiences, at the very least, to be sharing the story you're trying to get out. So it doesn't have to be just that one person who's articulating that message, but it can be all the people who are in that office. And when you're talking about something like local government or a police department or something like that, you want them all to be telling the same story out there and not inventing pieces of it themselves that suits their, whether it's, you know, the way they talk or how they explain it or what they heard from the guy who told them this, or that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. That is absolutely right. Keeping the story consistent across the board is the most important piece. And, you know, that gets lost in translation sometimes. So being able to ensure that everybody's getting the same message, no matter what language they're speaking or lingo they understand, is something that needs to be taken very seriously. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to get people to know, like, and trust you. Even if you, let's say they didn't vote for you, you still need to get them to know, like, and trust you. At least trust you with honesty, with information, with decision making that's supposed to be in the best interest of the city or the state or the local region. And that can't happen if you're not communicating well.
You brought up to the tragedy of the George Floyd murder, and we're going to set aside the tension over that, and let's just talk about the communication pieces around that, right? What do you think that, and something that I noticed coming out of that is that more and more brands, let's say, that did not necessarily have a stake directly in the criminal investigation and in the court case, actually came out and expressed an opinion on what happened, right? They took a stand in a way that I don't think I've seen before, right? So many people came out and so many brands came out, Nike and Reebok and, right on down the line, talking about who they are, what they believe, and why this was obviously why this was wrong, but what they felt, what their brand statement, their brand positioning was about it. I want to get your perspective on how you feel those brands did that. Did anyone's particularly do it well? Did any particularly fall down in your estimation? And I see there were a few that did.
I mean, I don't want to stomp on anyone, but I'll put it to you like this, and I learned this very on in my career. It's not always who's out there doing it. Sometimes when you're not involved in doing it, you stand out just as much, right? So those that decided not to take a stand, or those that were very light-footed in it, tiptoed around it. My style of branding is called peace and goodwill. But I believe that every brand needs to have a level of goodwill. Sometimes people have a hard time figuring out where they want to be at on the goodwill portion. Or am I doing donations? Or, are we partnering with a charity? I think the George Floyd situation was low-hanging fruit. And I'll tell you why. Even the police department that I'm on the community engagement board for Redondo Beach Police Department, and our chief was the first one to make a public stance against what had happened. And how often does blue go against blue? They don't. So if a police department, a chief, someone that leads, and I think he has a position on DOJ, can come out against this, then it's low-hanging fruit for brands. It made sense for them to get behind it in a very strong way. Of course, Ben and Jerry's, they've just been amazing since the Colin Kaepernick thing. Nike, of course, and there's so many others. But again, the ones that really stood out are the ones that didn't say anything, because it shows their lack of commitment one way or the other. There are those that are against it. At least they're taking a stand, and that speaks to their core audience, and they're fine with that. It's really hard to have a powerful brand when you don't stand on something. Like, whatever it is, you need to get behind it. So for me, with that, the George Floyd situation, it was not just the ones that stood up, but the ones that stood back and were just very fearful of even taking a stand, because that shows you kind of where their weakness is. And then you have to decide as a consumer, is that what you're going to support? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're all consumers of something. What are we supporting? I don't even eat ice cream like that, and I support Ben and Jerry's now. Sorry.
Ben and Jerry's got some good ice cream. Their politics aside, they got some great ice cream, and I like their personally. I like their politics. I'm on board. But
it's calorie rich, and COVID didn't do too well for waistline. I was like, I'm gonna buy some, I'll give it to the kids. Waistline, you're gonna have to.
Yeah. I'm not sure I can get back into the suits anytime soon. That's for sure. we're gonna stick with the jeans and the sweatpants for a little while.
That part.
But that's a great point that you bring up about brands that stayed silent. And we can pivot away from the George Floyd murder and talk about in general when there is a polarizing event and brands that again don't necessarily are not directly related to the what's going on. And I represent some colleges and some other brands as well that didn't necessarily have to get out there, but we decided to anyway. And there's been this wave in the last 5-ish, maybe more years about uh, uh, brands. I'm sorry, about consumers expecting that behavior from the brands that they like. Um, I'm searching for the phrase cause related. It's not cause related marketing, but you know where I'm going, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's people expect to be, and I think it's a product of perhaps the millennial generation or maybe even younger, where if I'm going out to buy that pair of sneakers, I want to know that pair of sneakers stands for what I believe in. If I'm going to shop at that store, I want to make sure that that store stands for what I believe in. And that's something that's brand new in our PR universe, right?
Yeah.
How do you address that with your clients?
It really is part of, I always go back to the branding piece of it. When you're looking at your value statement, do your actions lend to support your value statement, who you are as a brand? It doesn't necessarily have to be something to advocate for. Maybe it's something to support. Maybe there's something in your community that you can support. And it does not have to always be heavy, right? People don't always want to feel heavy and like they have to be advocates in order to buy a cute shirt. But what does your environment look like? And how can you contribute to that? So I really look at what is around us, what is your value statement, and what can you do that shows an obvious consistency with what your brand represents. So I live here in Redondo Beach. There are organizations that support just keeping the beach clean. Like who wouldn't support that? It does not have to always be heavy, but it should be something that makes a difference in the communities that you serve and that support you. So if it's fun, if it's youth driven, if it's cause driven, if the owner is just a huge advocate of something important, how does it support your consumers? How does it support the quality of life if you're in a local market? I mean, there's so many ways that you can enter into that space and that conversation, but it doesn't always have to be heavy. Sometimes people just want to have a good time and look cute.
And that leads into something else we wanted to talk about, which is maybe one of the most overused phrases in PR, thought leadership. Right. And we all do this for our clients. And we most frequently probably think about it in the form of an opinion piece in a newspaper, right? Oh, I'm a thought leader on this thing or that thing. But to your point there, being a thought leader, maybe it's more important to be an action leader. Maybe it's more important to walk the walk that demonstrates where your values are, what you think, and how you're making a difference in your community. Agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it comes down to how are you solving a problem differently, in a different way, to a different demographic. Any of that can lend to your thought leadership and being able to explain that and communicate it out to your consumers and your supporters. Those types of things make a difference and show how you stand out. And then also how you actually put time, effort, and strategy into what you are doing. All of those things matter when it comes to supporting a brand. If you're looking for raving fans, right? Not everybody's looking. Some people are fine if you just buy my product one time or if you just use my service one time. But if you're looking for raving fans, which I think it's important to try to create, these are people that support you. I support Ben Jerry. I mean, eat ice cream like that. Keep coming back to them, but they're thought leaders in how they have decided to move forward in their business. How are they helping to solve a problem, or how are they helping to communicate out the support and rally advocates around? It's not even always heavy. Sometimes it's just funny. Like they have the funniest tweets ever. So it's not heavy, but it's something I'm with that. And I can get with that. So it doesn't always have to be heavy, but being original and finding just carving out your space that makes you different.
Speaking of being original, Clubhouse, let's just jump into that real quick because I said in the beginning, it's sort of a force to be reckoned with, my personal opinion, but every time I'm on Clubhouse, I see you there. And you're always leading a discussion, right? It's not just you sort of chiming in on something, like you're leading groups on there. Tell us a little bit about Clubhouse, how you use it, and sort of your perception of what that platform is.
Like any platform, I always suggest people find your space that you're comfortable in, comfortable being a part of that community. With Clubhouse, I like to talk and I like to hear other people's ideas. I also look for solutions to problems. So I try to bring issues forward that have a variety of solutions and a variety of thought leaders that might want to participate and lend their own voice. So it's usually just finding those spaces. And because I am in leadership in a lot of different spaces, so I'm an LA County Commissioner and Vice President of Black Public Relations Society LA, who has some of the largest names attached to them, like Netflix and Showtime, and BET. So we have a lot of conversations about issues. So there's nothing more important for me than to simplify complex issues through conversation. And that is where I have found Clubhouse to be very useful. Okay. But I have seen rooms that last for like 14 hours. And now they're in a space where they're monetizing. For me, in public relations, once you start applying money to conversation and thought leadership, it kind of loses its authenticity a bit, because then people are starting to say and do things simply for the dollars or to get more people to follow or more dollars. And that is where I pull back. My group that I lead are never more than an hour, because busy professionals like us, we don't have 2 hours, 10 hours to give to anything. I mean, my God. So it makes it very just important that we use our time wisely. And when there is something that comes up that needs some, communication, that needs some ideas thrown around, we're looking for solutions for something, or even I'm trying to write about something, right? Getting different people's ideas and thoughts so that I can quote them later. Those are opportunities that make sense. So when it first happens, it's like everything's like, oh my God, amazing. And then you're like, there's a lot of people in here. It's kind of crowded. Hold on, wait a minute. And you really want to carve out a space that is important and impactful, because those that come in and contribute know that you value their time and you value their input. And that's what really matters at the end of the day.
Is that the tactic that you've taken in the rooms that you lead there, is sort of making that subject matter very specific?
Absolutely. And resetting the room when it goes off the hinges, because it can, right? People go off on their tangents and then the goal of the conversation gets led astray, but you don't want to make anybody feel like their ideas and what they're trying to say isn't important. So you allow for people to express themselves, but keeping on track the goal of this room, the goal of this day, the goal of this conversation is to what? That's what's important when I lead conversations there, whether it's something, social, something career driven, empowering. We are looking for answers and responses to this thing, and what are yours, so that's kind of how it has become a thing for me. But again, it's limited because we all got stuff to do. So when there's important things that come up, let's address them. Let's get out there. And also, let's make sure that we're respectful and we are allowing everybody to express themselves. I think that's hugely important too, because look, our leaders, federally, state, regionally, they can't even seem to do that, right? We got madness jumping off at the Capitol. Like, what's going on right now? We are not the Capitol. We're going to have a conversation, and then we're all going to go back home and go do our thing.
Oh, I thought they were tourists. Well, those were tourists, aren't they?
Right.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's right. I don't know an airport that has ever let me travel with any of that stuff, but I
I've seen quieter high school gyms.
Man. During homecoming.
Just ridiculous, just ridiculous. Well, anyway, that is a great place to end up our conversation. I am going to put that weekly Clubhouse chat into my calendar because I'm subscribed to it on Clubhouse, but it's not in my calendar, and that's where I always miss it. So I got to come back, and anybody who wants to join into there, just search for Tonya on Clubhouse. Subscribe to the room that she runs every Friday, right at noon.
Mhm. Yep.
Noon Eastern. So
Eastern,
it's 9 in LA. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Let's segue into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast. And you've probably heard this one before, Tonya. This is where we steal a page from inside the actor's studio. We ask our guests a series of rapid fire questions meant to elicit a simple 1 or 2 word answer. The first thing comes to mind, that kind of gut reaction thing. With your indulgence, here we go. Rapid fire question number 1. What is your favorite news source?
CNN.
Right.
I mean, Don Lemon, because he makes me laugh. I'm sorry. I wait all the time. Yes, Don Lemon.
I love Don Lemon. He's great. He's great.
Funny.
Rapid fire question number 2. Your favorite social media platform?
I have to say Twitter. That's where I met you. That's where I met Michelle. My little social media family. It's Twitter now.
It reminds me of the old Associated Press wire that I used to pull in the newsrooms, right? It's just constantly running and running and running. I do miss the days where it was just completely linear. And you could it was minute by minute by minute, and you saw things unfold in real time.
Hey, rapid fire, it has changed just like your questions, right?
It's so true. All right, back on track. Resetting the room. Yes! Rapid fire question number 3. Coffee or alcohol?
Both. I mean, what? Depends on the time of the day.
There you go. Rapid fire question number 4. What is your favorite on-the-run food?
Oh, French fries. Are you kidding me?
Mm.
And if you mess up French fries, I'm never coming back.
Oh, are you anywhere near an In-N-Out right now?
In-N-Out, McDonald's, Burger King. I mean, come on.
There you go.
The spot down at the corner.
Nice. Those are the best ones. A seasoned grill. It's all about a seasoned grill. Oh my goodness.
You are so on it.
All right. Rapid fire question number 5. What do you want to be after you finish this career?
I don't plan on finishing this career. I love writing. I want to be Terry McMillan or Maya Angelou, just write until they bury me.
That sounds like a good plan. Well, Tonya, this has been a great conversation. Thank you very much. Please let people know how they can find you online.
Oh my God. I would love to connect with any of y'all that want to talk about anything that makes me laugh at any time. Tonya McKenzie PR, TonyMcKenzie PR on all social media platforms. It's about consistency.
I love that. I love that. Thanks, Tonya, for being here. We really appreciate it. Great conversation today. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Appold. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.